Welcome to Bible Fiber, where we explore the textures and shades of the biblical tapestry. I'm Shelley Neese, president of the Jerusalem Connection, a Christian organization dedicated to sharing the stories of Israel's people, both ancient and modern. I'm also the author of the book, Bible Fiber, a 52-week study of the 12 minor prophets, available on Amazon. This week's reading portion covers Numbers 13:1 to 15:41. It contains one of the most famous stories in the Torah, the episode of the 12 spies. 12 appointed leaders went to Canaan to scout the land and its inhabitants. Moses gave them very specific instructions. They were to enter the land through the Negev Desert and journey up to the hill country in the north. They were to take note of the fertility of the land, its trees, and its produce. Also, the scouts needed to assess if the people in the land were strong or weak, numerous or sparse, and if the towns were fortified. After 40 days, the spies returned carrying a cluster of grapes so large that they had to drape it from a pole held between two men. They reported that the land was indeed flowing with milk and honey. Side note, for decades, the prevailing scholarly consensus was that the Torah's reference to Israel being rich with honey was actually date syrup, because there was no evidence of organized beekeeping in the Iron Age, only just wild honey. However, in 2007, an excavation at Tel Rehov, an ancient city in the Jordan Valley, uncovered the oldest intact commercial beekeeping site ever found in the ancient world. They discovered around 100 unbaked beehives and an industrial-scale honey factory. The Tel Rehov apiary proves that when the spies declared it a land flowing with milk and honey, a commercial bee industry was already part of the landscape. But I still suggest buying date honey from the airport the next time you go to Israel. The spies announced that the people were too powerful and their towns were fortified. They specifically mentioned the Amalekites, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Canaanites, and the giant descendants of Anak. Anak was the chief of a warrior tribe in Hebron. Apparently, the spies were not the only ones who took notice of the Anakites' height. There's a famous letter in the British Museum called the Papyrus Anastasia that dates to the 13th century BCE and describes the people of Canaan as giants. In the letter, the author describes a treacherous mountain pass in Canaan that is guarded by warriors somewhere between 6 and 9 feet tall. According to the spies, though, the Anakites were descendants of the ancient Nephilim. Numbers 13 gives the spies' report. So they brought the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we see in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim. The Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." To understand why they made this connection of the Anakites to the Nephilim, it helps to examine the ancient context and the theology of the Hebrew Bible. The Nephilim first appear in Genesis 6, and they are described as the offspring of the sons of God and human women. In ancient Israelite thought, the Nephilim were not merely tall humans. They were a hybrid race resulting from a rebellion in the divine realm. They represented ancient chaos and violence and a direct threat to the order God established for creation. The flood narrative immediately follows their introduction, and God acts to cleanse the earth of this corruption. So the spies were essentially claiming that the chaotic monsters of the pre-flood world had survived in Canaan, and this rhetorical choice was meant to emphasize the absolute impossibility of the conquest of Canaan. An army can fight human soldiers, but it can't fight the legendary giants of antiquity. For the 10 spies and the weeping congregation, the presence of the Nephilim meant certain defeat, and it proved the land could never be taken. For Joshua and Caleb, the meaning was entirely different. The Nephilim represented the greatest evil. By trusting God to defeat them, Joshua and Caleb demonstrated that God's power was absolute, that he could overcome even the most terrifying remnants of early rebellion. Since God destroyed the Nephilim once in the flood, he could deliver the Anakites into their hands now. In Numbers 14, they plead with the terrified camp. "If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for they are no more than bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." The fear tactics of the other 10 spies completely demoralized the encampment and drowned out the assurances of Joshua and Caleb. The Israelites wept and demanded a new leader to bring them back to Egypt. They went so far as to accuse Moses and Aaron of setting a trap for them. "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword?" they said. "Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt." The Israelites were actively accusing God of harboring malicious intent towards them. They claimed he brought them into the desert specifically to slaughter them. And this accusation turned the entire narrative of the Exodus upside down. God had just miraculously delivered them from centuries of brutal slavery. He parted the Red Sea and fed them manna from heaven. Yet, in a moment of panic, they concluded that his ultimate goal was their destruction. To accuse God of malice is the worst kind of insult, and it denied his fundamental goodness and ignored his proven track record of faithfulness. Egypt was the site of their oppression. It was a place where their male infants were thrown into the Nile. By saying it would be better to return to Egypt, the Israelites minimized the horror of their bondage, and they declared that the physical security of slavery was better than freedom provided by God. When panic takes over, even the miraculous interventions of God are quickly forgotten. The Israelites looked at the giants and decided God was small. They looked at the promised land and decided Egypt was better. But the punishment for their fears couldn't have been worse. Every member of the camp who was 20 or older counted in the census would die in the desert over the next 40 years. 1 year of wandering for every day the scouts were in the land. As for the 10 unfaithful spies, they would be struck down immediately for their lack of foresight and faith. God would wait for the next generation to lead. Caleb and Joshua were the only exceptions. There are a few really important facts to highlight in this drama. First, the problem wasn't the land. The land was wonderful. It was the people of the land that struck fear, and that fear was based on a lie. As Joshua will later prove, the peoples of the land and their fortified cities turned out to be very conquerable. In fact, we learn in Joshua 2 that the people of Jericho were as afraid of the Israelites as the Israelites had been of them. Rahab reported that her people had heard of the mighty wonders that God did in Egypt, and their hearts melted with fear. If the God of the Israelites could bring down the greatest empire in the world, the people of Jericho rightly reasoned that he could certainly flatten the walls of Jericho. Joshua later even drove out the sons of Anak from Hebron. No word of their giant-like stature comes up in Joshua 11. Joshua 11:21 says, "At that time Joshua came and wiped out the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their towns." When I read of the spies' account, I can't help but think of the early struggles of Zionist leaders in the 19th and 20th centuries. Even in the Jewish community, Zionist ideals were a minority until the actual establishment of the State of Israel. In the lifetime of Theodor Herzl, a majority of Orthodox Jews saw the Zionist agenda as a false messianism. Groups like Agudath Israel formed in 1912 to oppose the movement. They agreed that the Jewish identity must remain rooted in the Torah. Many secular Jews in the early 20th century saw Zionism as tribalism. They considered it an affront to the Enlightenment. Reform Judaism and parts of Europe and America also officially rejected Jewish nationalism. They recognized Judaism as a religion, but not a nationality. The 1885 Pittsburgh Platform explicitly declared that Jews were no longer a nation. The document stated they expected no return to Palestine. In 1919, 299 American rabbis endorsed a statement from President Woodrow Wilson, and this petition protested the establishment of Jewish state, saying it countered the ideas of democracy. The resistance continued for decades, and in 1942, the American Council for Judaism actively lobbied against a Jewish nation. They feared a state would lead to accusation of dual loyalty for Jewish citizens living elsewhere. I could list other examples of internal dissent, but what matters now is that it was eventually the Joshuas and Calebs of the Jewish diaspora whose vision won out. The civil disputes over Zionism were only quieted when the new nation miraculously beat back their external threats. Giants have always been present in the Jewish story. and fear has often halted momentum. But the Bible shows us, and Israel's modern history has proven, that the grasshoppers have God on their side. Shabbat Shalom and Am Israel Chai.